Welcome back to the show, Gary Wayne. Gary, thanks for joining us again today on Blurry Creatures. You're an author of the book Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and you've been on our show before. We've talked about chimerical creatures. It's good to have you back on the show. Thanks for coming back on.
Well, thanks for inviting me back, and so happy to be here.
Yeah.
And looking forward to the conversation. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting show today.
Yeah, so like we said last time, my grandma, she's 98 years old. She's reading your book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And we made a couple jokes about that, but we loved your wealth of knowledge. You know a lot, and the best part about you, Gary, is you tell us from the get go. You can talk about anything you want, and so many times we have to stay on track. But that's what we love about having you on, is that the show can go anywhere. So let's talk a little bit. Let's kick it off. Well, do you have any new thoughts on Bigfoot? Do you have any updated thoughts on Bigfoot? Because that's the question we ask everybody. We already asked you in our last interview, but I don't know. Has your It's been 6 months since the last time we interviewed you. Who knows? You do this research and anything can happen. Do you have any new thoughts on that creature, Gary, or is
Same old, same old. I haven't really dug a whole lot more into it, so nothing more to really add to it, except that it just seems like there's more and more, kind of a closing in of the relationship, that it's, seemingly becoming more and more part of the larger picture as to giants in the end time and everything else that is going on. That is absolutely, astounding in terms of we look at things that are going out in the world today.
Oh man, isn't it? It's crazy. So you're writing a new book, and it's specifically more about the tribes of giants, right? Can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of what spurred that on and inspired you to kind of write a whole new book?
Well, I said I would not write a sequel to the Genesis 6 conspiracy, and I have other books that I wanted to write, and I have one that I kind of set aside for a while to get this project done. And one of the things that sort of kept coming up and resurfacing and hearing back from people on feedback is that they seem to want more information about what's in the Bible about the giants, as opposed to, they've made some of the connection of the dots, around the world, but they're just, this hunger for more about it. And what I didn't want to be is redundant in terms of doing another sequel. So I wanted the information, even though it's going to overlap with what I did in the first book, I wanted to be in addition and sort of targeted to what people were looking for. And so I covered, a wide variety of topics in the first book, but this one's going to be more focused on the tribes after the flood of giants and how that connects into prophecy. So we're going to cover in details what the hybrid giants were and races of giants that people may not familiar with, because most people just look at the giants in the Bible and say it's the Nephilim. But there are so many more different tribes of the giants that are in the Bible. And, again, you don't want to go on in detail ad nauseum, but I think people would be very, very shocked to find out just, how many different kinds of tribes there were. There's just so many of them that they just don't associate with them, because you get the name of the tribe. You don't get the meaning translated into English as to what that word meant for the name of the tribe and where the heck did they come from, because they're not in the Table of Nations.
Yeah. I've heard there's over 28 tribes of giants, but maybe there's a lot more. Is that even close to how many tribes there are, or have you found more?
I think that 28 is probably on the top side, but probably closer to 20. Some of the names sort of get redundant, so or used twice. So you want to be careful of that. And then a lot of people would, let's say for the Gazazites, for example, that some people might refer to as the giants. That's true, but it was the Anakim that were in the city of Gaza. So you have to be careful not to count them twice. But there's probably 20 of the tribes that are out there, and all sorts of different names, and then some of the obscure ones that people haven't heard of. Like, you might run across people and they know what the Rephaim, they know what the Anakim are, they might know what the Havim are, they might know what the Hivim are. They might know what the Horim are. They might know what the Zuzim are, or they may not, because of those are the ones in Egypt, but they're very much related to the Zamzuzim. But you get into other ones that people aren't really familiar with. And so making sure I'm highlighting that. So a couple of those might be, who are the Cadmonites in Genesis 15? I mean, they don't have a patriarch. Who are the Kenizzites and the Kenites that are also related to them? And they don't have patriarchs in the Bible. And they're listed amongst these giants like the Perizzites and the Maccatites. And so I'm going to bring out who they are, where they fit in, and what information that we have on them, and how they fit in with this really, really large geopolitical relationship between all of these different kinds of giants that were after the flood, and how they were not only rivals, but they also worked together, and what type of military strategies they used in terms of Pentapolis city-states and their village. And there's a term I'll be using in the book called the mice network that they have with the villages that work between the Pentapolis city-states, and how they work together in greater alliances. So we're going to get into a lot of that detail.
Hey, Gary, I have a question about that. Like, I know that we assumed a lot of these giants we see post-flood come out of the line of Canaan, right? Are you saying that some of these ones that are mentioned here we can't find a lineage for? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. They just come into the Bible out of nowhere. And then you get the hybrid offspring as well that are unaccounted for. So if you look for, the patriarch for Canaanite, I mean, that's going to be Canaan, and he's, an offspring of the lineage of Ham. So you get that table of nations. But if you're looking for the patriarch for the Anakim, they're not listed in the table of nations. And so we do get that name elsewhere in the Bible called Arba as the father and the patriarch of the Anak, but they're not in the table of nations, just as Rapha, which is probably very close to the name of the patriarch of the Rephaim after the flood that Og was part of. His name isn't in the book of nations as well. So none of these nations that were, like the Avim, have patriarchs in the table of nations. So those are the ones that I'm focusing on, and then connecting them back and showing people that we know they're giants because of this, this, and this, and they're not listed in the table of nations. And then they produced hybrid offspring giants. So you have in Numbers 13:33, when the spies go into the covenant land, they're reporting on giants and people that are taller than them. So we get a report from Caleb and Joshua of the people that are in there, and they're going to list Talmai, Ahiman, and Sheshai as 3 Anakim. And then they're going to talk about these other people that are taller, like the Canaanites and the Amalekites and the Amorites. And most people think, well, we can't really trust that end of the report, because you get down further into Numbers 13:33 in that zone, and you get the embellished report of the Nephilim that they saw there. Well, the Anakim weren't Nephilim, they were Rephaim, as Deuteronomy 2 talks about, and describes a whole series of giants in Deuteronomy 2. And that's sort of an introductory chapter for the conquest of the covenant land, that they're going to be going into this land infested with giants. So that's an embellishment. That's the evil part to scare the Israelites, the part about the Nephilim, because they were the Rephaim, and the Rephaim are after the flood, and the Nephilim were before the flood, because we don't get accounts other than Numbers 13:33 of Nephilim after the flood, and that's the part of the evil report. So we know that they're Anakim. But these people that are taller that are listed, we don't really get context as to what they're driving at. So these are a group of people that are recorded in the Egyptian text as people that were 6 to 9 feet tall, so taller than the Israelites, but smaller than the Rephaim. And they lived amongst the Rephaim throughout the covenant land. And so now if we take that sort of idea back that there's these two different kinds of people, and Deuteronomy 1 backs up the initial report and says that there were the Anakim in the land, and there were also people taller that lived in these mighty walls. So we get a reaffirming of that, not a reaffirming of the Nephilim, which is the embellished part of the report. So giants and Rephaim probably were smaller giants than the Nephilim. So that's why they used Nephilim to scare people, that they were the monstrous sized ones. Not that these ones weren't big. They were, anywhere from, 10 to, 18 feet, 19 feet tall. If you're looking at Gilgamesh at being on a royal cubit, he would have been 19 feet tall. So these were monsters, just different size of monsters. And then you have this hybrid group of peoples who intermarried with the Rephaim. And we get that shown with the Amalekites as one. So, the Amalekites are started after the Amalekim register in the Bible in Genesis 14 in the War of Giants. So the Amalekites show up in Genesis 36 and many generations after, because that Genesis 14 is the time of Abraham, and the Amalekites are going to come from the offspring of Abraham's descendants. So it's going to come from Eliphaz and Timnah, and Eliphaz is the son of Esau, the brother of Isaac, or brother of Jacob, son of Isaac, son of Abraham. So you have generations there. And Timnah is a daughter of the Horim, of the chiefs of Edom, of the Aleph Duke kingdoms in the land of Edom, and they produced this hybrid nation. But Amalekim were around 3 to 4 generations before, and before that even, right, as an Aboriginal people after the flood. And then you get all of these tribes that are listed in Genesis 10 under the Canaanite family. So you get Canaan, who has Heth as a son and produces the Hittites, and then you have Sidon, who is his other son that is the son of Canaan, and then you get patriarchless tribes of Canaan, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Hivites, and on and on and on. And they don't have a patriarch assigned to them, and most people just assume, well, they're probably the offspring of Sidon and Canaan and Heth, but it doesn't say that. These are separate tribes from them, and they don't have a patriarch. And everybody else in the table of nations has a patriarch that's listed there. These are the hybrids. They had Rephaim patriarchs. That's why their name, like Arba or Rapha, were not listed in the table of nations.
Do you think all these different tribes had physical distinctions, or they were just in certain areas, like that you could tell the difference between the tribes, or were they sort of physically, and do you think that they were the same? Like they were just in different locations?
I think it's more geography, because most of the giants go back to the root of the Rephaim, just as Og is the last of the Rephaim. I think the original Nephilim, they repopulate and they start to create their own tribes elsewhere. So the Anakim and Arba are Rephaim. So they would have come out of that initial, what I would say would be a second incursion, as opposed to the survival of the Nephilim, because we don't get Nephilim that show up listed by name after the flood. So I think they would have been very, very similar, and we get similar descriptions of them throughout the covenant land and throughout records that are kept in Egypt and Mesopotamia about these kinds of people. And it makes sense that they would be consistent with those descriptions, because these tribes were also located in Egypt, and they were also had some of these tribes in Mesopotamia. So it would make sense that the descriptions would be rather similar. And a lot of the names that we do get actually sort of describe part of the terrible nature to these individuals, whether or not, let's say, the Rephaim, who had long necks, right? And so same with the Anakim, they had long necks. And the reason why I say the Rephaim had long necks in support of the Anakim, because we don't get that technically said, but the Anakim or Rephaim. But King Og, as you take his name back into Hebrew, it means long neck, and he was the last of the Rephaim. So you get that sort of serpentine sort of connection. But typically these are very white, pale skin, just as the Horim is not only a definition of giant, but also as pale white, and the words around it are like, white bread and words associated with that. So we get that. And then we get these hair colors of red and blonde that go with it as well. So again, and we get a few variations with like the Hyksos, who are intermixed into these peoples as well. They get to be more into the dark-haired variety. So you've got, and that's more of a Mesopotamian variety, more of the dark hair, although a lot of people will say Gilgamesh was blonde hair. So, but when we see depictions, they're going to be black-haired for the most part from the Hyksos in that stream.
So Gary, I just want to level set real quick. So the reason, just if I'm tracking, the reason that we're not seeing a patriarchal lineage in the Bible is because we have, as you're hypothesizing, there was this second incursion, right? Because we have the Nephilim destroyed by the flood. The Rephaim is the second coming of the giants, obviously smaller, not as big as the pre-flood giants. But we see all these tribes, as you're saying, popping up without a direct lineage or direct connection to the Table of Nations. And so the assumption is that there was a second incursion. So this isn't like that there's giant genes expressing themselves in the line of Ham, because these just show up. Is that correct?
They just show up, and we get the tribes listed from Canaan. So if there was that giant tribe, that would be perhaps one way of indicating that's, or suggesting that's how giants show up after the flood. But you don't resolve the issue that 9 of the 12 tribes don't have a patriarch in the Canaanite nation. So who are they? Because everybody else has a patriarch. And only Rephaim, with Rephaim like Arba and the Amalekim, they don't have a patriarch from, and when I say the Amalekim, that's the giant ones, not the ones from Timnah, who's a Horim, and Eliphaz, who was an Israelite. They're not in there. And only the descendants of Noah that created the 70 nations are listed. And so non-descendants of Noah as patriarchs for nations, they're not in that table of nations, because it's just for the descendants of Noah.
And so, Gary, what happens to these tribes? Do they do they create hybrids? Do they continue to propagate? Are they wiped out? Are they wiped off the map in the campaigns of Joshua? Do they go on and create the beast empires? What happens to these tribes as we identify them, and sort of their lack of their murky sort of genesis? Really, their murky genesis, the start of these tribes. How does this carry out? You say it's about 20 or so. What happens to these giants?
Well, many of them do get pushed out of the covenant land, not all, because obviously they didn't take Gaza, where the Anakim still were, and other tribes of Philistines. Philistines are a hybrid branch who we get their patriarch out of the Table of Nations, but they migrated to Egypt, and then they migrated to Crete, and there they intermarry with the Cherethites and the Caphtorim and a couple other tribes. And then after probably a disaster like Santorini, migrate into the covenant land because they need some place to move to, and they expropriate that land in the south west of the covenant land, and that's not taken. And so they're going to survive in that sort of bloodline, and the Hyksos are part of that bloodline, which is why when they are toppled in Egypt, they actually, some of them go back to Canaan, and some of them actually go back to Crete, because that's all part of that same sort of line. But the point of the question is yes, some of them do survive, and they're still controlling through their bloodlines and in partnership with the scion bloodlines, or the grafting in of the hybrids, all of the kingships of all of the nations. And we also have this going on in Mesopotamia. So when you look at the beast empires, these are the descendants of the beast empire. So you have, if people were to use Egypt and Assyria, you would have Egypt and Mesopotamian bloodlines that are part of the first two that are going to be producing and coming out of those bloodlines, the Babylon beast empire, and then the Persians, which are intermixed with another race because they take their more lineage back to the Aryans, which would be an earlier variety of this second incursion. And all of a sudden, then you have the Medes, and then you have Greece. And of course, Greece is intermarried with the same groups of people as they migrated out of northwest Turkey. They went sort of north and into the Mediterranean and into the Mediterranean islands. And they also went into Mesopotamia, and they also went down into the Covenant land and into Egypt. So that was kind of the epicenter of once they populated enough where they migrated to. And so they were the ones that were producing the royal bloodlines. They were the royal families. They created the noble elite of the ancient world, which produced all of these beast empires. And when you start to look at why they're called beast empires, it's a nice imagery that comes out of Daniel 7, when you have four beasts that, you can attach the word beast empire to, but Daniel 2 has metallic empires, same idea, just with a different allegory. And then you get animals again in Daniel 8, but it's this beast that comes out of the sea, which has those seven great empires, which there's only been six, but the rise of the seventh is part of that beast that comes out of the sea, a hydra leviathan type of creature that is going to bring about the end time world empire. And then there's the eighth one, which Antichrist is going to run afterwards, and he's also a beast. But all of these have bloodlines back to these hybrid beasts, right? So when I say hybrid beasts, you also have angelic humans to create the Rephaim, and then the hybrid. So they have these bloodlines that they track as part of that beast bloodline or the royal bloodlines.
Gary, I had a question when you talk about empires. To the best of your knowledge, do you feel like these empires are working all together as one, or are they warring against each other? I mean, what's this? Is there a symbiotic relationship if they're all part of the beast, or are they independent of each other, kind of just carving out their own existence, you think?
Well, directionally, they're working together, but there are so many bloodlines and so many branches that you get these rivalries. And at the end of it, if they get their way, and I presume that they will, as opposed to another way of producing Antichrist, that they'll be the ones that produce the beast Antichrist from the bloodlines of the Rephaim and the Nephilim, is that there can only be one at the end. There can only be one family of dynasties that they want to set up for the new Atlantis. So they're all vying to be that one family, right? They'll have a role if they're not the successful Antichrist. And that's why in prophecy, we get multiple Antichrists predicted, not just one. There's going to be many Antichrists, and you have to be patient and sort through before you start to figure out which one is the ultimate one. And it's kind of like, if you've seen that Highlander movie, or the Highlander series, where there can only be one. That's sort of the fairy allegory of the bloodlines, as opposed to the dragon bloodlines. So fairy being female, or the Tuatha De Danann, who are all part of this mix. And I'll show that quite clearly in the book that I'm putting out. Even though I cover that in Genesis 6, I really connect them into the giants of the Middle East and when and how they migrated away. And they're part of the fairy people. That's what they're called. And they're pale white and they're red hair and they're blonde haired, and they have all these other similarities. And the fairy quickening is what happens in the Highlander movies, right? Where they're not taking the blood of the people, they're using an allegory of taking the energy of the people. But at the end of the day, the winner of these warrior Highlander type immortal beings, it rules the world. And that's kind of what happens. There can only be one. So again, I would look at something like those, and this happens with so much of entertainment is they're telling us their history and what's going to happen in very interesting sort of fairy tales and narratives. And they got a whole bunch of other things embedded in underneath in terms of what they're really talking about. But directionally, you get an understanding of where they came from and where they want to go. And it's always about ruling the world.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on our show, the symbolism and the foreshadowing. And it seems like, Gary, in ancient times, human beings, if I just think about this logically, human beings are born in the image of God. So we are imagers, right? And then you have these hybrids and these giants surrounding human beings. So do you feel like it's kind of like high school where they're like human beings are sort of like the lonely freshmen getting picked on by all these higher entities, these giants, these hybrids? They're just making fun of humans, and it just sounds like a horrible time to be a human being. And do you think that's kind of foreshadowing what's to come, where if they could transform humans into something else, then the humans that don't take the mark or don't change genetically are going to be picked on again? I'm kind of seeing, I'm trying to imagine what it was like to be a human being in the middle of all this.
Yeah, it would have been sheer terror. If you look at King Hababa of the of the Epic of Gilgamesh, he's called the Terrible One. And just as most of the Rephaim were terrible ones, and it was his job to make life miserable for humans. And he was the king of the Cedar Forest, which is at Mount Hermon. And of course, Enkidu or Enkidu, depending on which transliteration that you're doing, who befriends Gilgamesh, they go to the Cedar Forest and he actually kills King Habada. And Enkidu is sort of presented as a sort of protector of humans, but that's typically not the case. Gilgamesh, who was a terrible sort of potentate and dictator and killer of humans, was the same as Habada. And typically, they looked at humans as, almost as insects, as worms. There's a book that's out there called, and I know we can't take this as gospel, but it's very interesting reading. It's the Lost Book of King Og, and it's part of the Manichaean Book of Giants that roots back to the Enochian Book of Giants. And it was released apparently by the Vatican and translated by a priest and an author named Denham. And they look at as humans as, sub-beings, as worms, as insects and small ones. And so they just look at us as almost like cattle to be used for slavery, to be used for rituals, to be used to drink their blood, just as the Rephaim and the Nephilim drank blood, just as secret societies do that at the adept level to this day. And they would actually eat humans as well when they were low on food. So no, they had no room for keeping humans in the mix in terms of let's say a purebred human. They were there for, to be used. And their role was to, why they're created by the fallen angels, is to ensure that all of mankind is led astray and that they can't receive their destiny, which is the resurrection. And so they were trying to obliterate humankind. And if you look at it from that perspective, then that's why they needed to control the complete governing system, to set up the feudal system where you have, the priest class, which is royal bloodlines. You have the noble and warrior classes, which are all the bloodlines. And then you have a very, very small sort of free enterprise class, very limited, would maybe made up of some humans, maybe some hybrids in there. And then you would have the humans at the bottom level, the caste level of the slavers. And this is the same caste system that was established all around the world because they were of the same origination for the kings and the bloodlines that ruled all of these different nations.
I love this when we talk about the beast empires. For the people that aren't familiar, our listeners that aren't familiar with this, can you quickly walk us through the beast empires and the kingdoms up until today? I mean, in maybe a macro overview, so that people can understand. I know that we talk about Daniel, and there's the imagery of the four major, which is Mesopotamia, Babylon, Rome. I'm going to mess this up, but sure. Can you walk through that up till today, and your thoughts on on these bloodlines and the existence of these bloodlines up until
Yeah,
modern
it
day?
starts with Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel at the time of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. So the first two empires aren't listed there, and they're thought to be Egypt and Assyria or Babel. And that could include Nimrod, or it could be the Syrian Empire. And Assyria comes out of the descendants of Nimrod. And Nimrod, after Babel, intermarries with the bloodlines of the giants in Mesopotamia. And so descending out of Mesopotamia are Babylon and Persia, which is succeeded by the Medes, but considered the same empire. And then you have Greece, and then you have Rome, and then you'll have the end time empire. Now, what's interesting with Nebuchadnezzar is that in Ezekiel 32, and in other passages, he's considered the terrible of nations. And in Ezekiel 32, you have this prophecy that includes Pharaoh, because again, Pharaoh is always included on the beast empires. You have this conversation that's going on where the terrible ones did the most horrific things on earth as the rulers of the earth. When they were slain, they went down to the abyss in the underworld and are locked in prisons along the sides of the abyss. And this conversation is going on between the current, one of the current beast kings, and talking about another beast king. And Nebuchadnezzar is that terrible one that is starting this whole sort of beast king in terms of a prophetic entrance and the description that Daniel's going to call him in Daniel 7, the start of the beast empires. And so Persia actually succeeds Babylon, from almost as an extension of the Babylon Empire. Again, some different bloodlines with the Aryans mixed in there, so you get a different leadership, but they're kind of part of the overall Babylon Empire. And if people look on a map, I mean, Babylon ruled most of the known civilized world at that time. And so they went from, towards India all the way to Egypt. And, Persia increased on that empire. And Assyria had a similar sized empire before that. And then from there, you have the rise of Greece. And Greece is sort of a newer entry onto it as you get, migrations of people and civilizations being established at a higher level coming out of the Middle East. And of course, Alexander, his legend is that, he's the offspring of a human female and a serpent who had sex with his mother. And Philip, his father, lost his eye because he was spying on this. And the god Amun, who is said to be the serpent that was procreating with Alexander's mother, punishes Philip for invading on their privacy and has one of his eyes removed. And so again, whether or not that's true or not, they take their pedigree and their genealogy and their belief system back to the offspring of the gods. And of course, he becomes very much an Antichrist type of archetype. And in Daniel 8, you get that description of the beast empire from, starting with Greece. Now, some people think that the seven that are talked about in Revelation 13 and Revelation 17 are the seven that are talked about in Daniel 8, with the Greek Empire defeating the Persian Empire, Alexander coming to power, he dies, and then his empire is split up into four. That includes Rome, and then Rome becomes the next empire after that. So you've got Alexander, the four empires after Alexander, then you have Rome, you've got six right there, with the seventh being the revived Roman Empire. It's not a contradiction to what Daniel 7 is talking about. It's additional information, and it's both. So in the beast empires that are being talked about in Daniel 8 with the Greek Empire, you get this indication that this Antichrist figure is going to come out of the Greek Empire, and is going to come out of the end time empire that is the rekindled Roman Empire only on a global scale. And of course, Rome comes out of the Greek Empire. So one is kind of sort of looking from that aspect that Antichrist may very well be coming out of the old Roman Empire, one of those nations, or out of Greece. But Greece seems to be a little bit more logical sort of understanding to the application of that prophecy. But we're going to have to be careful, because there's some prophetic allegory in there that maybe just that, not being literally that he's going to be Greek. But again, I mean, you have Alexander, who bent the world to his sway in a manner that hadn't been seen before. He was very much like an Antichrist figure trying to take over the world through war, which is the typical way that the beast empires gain their empires and their world empires, as in the famous seven. The last empire, though, is going to come together in a different way. And there's going to be wars involved, but it's not going to be like what Hitler tried to do to set up the 1,000-year Reich. This is going to be sort of assembled, and that's the only way that you can do it, because you just can't fight enough wars and live long enough to get it done. You have to sort of set up the system and then take it over.
Gary, do these bloodlines of the you talk about in these beast bloodlines or these empire bloodlines, these go underground pretty much after the fall of Rome? Do we see them, like, if we're talking about today, is it this stuff propagates unto today, and do they just go underground and behind the scenes instead of it being a really like an affront, like you would have had like these very visual or upfront sort of empires, like with these figure pieces like Alexander? It seems like the strategy changes. Is that what you see, or?
Well, it has in the last 150 years or so, but before that, it was very much in your face. So if you look at World War I, you have, the Windsors, who were the Hanovers from Germany, and they changed their name to Windsors in World War I because they didn't want to be associated with the bloodlines. They're basically your cousins of the Kaisers, and the Tsars were cousins of the first two, and then the Habsburgs were cousins of all of the first three, and sort of keep going with that thought process that they were all intermarrying in Europe, that these were the bloodlines, and they take their genealogies back in time to specific Rephaim and specific fallen angels, because the purity of that genealogy is where they sort of fit in the cult. And then if you move around the world, let's say into China, you have communist China that rises in the late 1940s. But before that, you have this dynasty, and it's basically the Li dynasty from the Shah dynasty. Shah and Li are the same, and it goes back to the dragon creators, right? And the offspring of the dragon kings, and all the bloodlines of the Chinese dynasties are, part of the Shah bloodline or the Li bloodline, and they also propagated many of the other dynasties in Southeast Asia, and there's a branch that even started the Japanese, and so the Yamamoto bloodlines and genealogies are all kept. They do that because it's important. These bloodlines existed all over the world, and so after World War I and World War II, some of them start to go incognito and behind the scenes, but you still have obvious ones that are out there, like the Windsor family. But whether or not it's the Stuart family, they're still out there. The Habsburgs are still out there. All of these old bloodlines are still there. And at the core of the European bloodlines would have been like the Plantagenet and the Anjou. There seemed to be sort of that epicenter of the sort of coming together of the scioning and the ennobling and the branching out to new families. For example, the Plantagenet that most of the presidents take their genealogies back to is a branch of the Anjou. And Anjou actually goes back, if you take that etymology, back into Mesopotamia from the god Anu, An of heaven. And so they keep these genealogies, and Prince Charles would be a kind of a good example, I think, of showing part of that genealogy, where he has said, and he's on record, and you can Google it and find it, it's not too hard, that he takes his genealogy back to Vlad the Impaler, who was part of Ordo Draconis, which was a group of royal kings that were trying to take the thrones back from, I guess, rivals or people they didn't think they wanted to have the throne back in the 1300s. And Vlad the Impaler is an archetypical Tuatha De Danann type of character and takes his genealogies back to the Scythians, where the Tuatha De Danann originate. And he has red hair, hazel eyes, pale skin, was educated in a mystery school in Vienna, the School of Solomon. He had a condition where he didn't like to be out during the day. And you couldn't get more obvious to the character that Dracula, which means son of a dragon, is established around than Vlad the Impaler, who's of the bloodline of the royal Scythians. I mean, it's just absolutely amazing. And so Prince Charles would not only have those genealogies back to Vlad, if he wanted to, he could present them all the way back to the first, for the second creation of giants after the flood. And in their belief system, a lot of giants survived the flood as well, and they escaped out of Tartarus, which is a prison that was held for the rebellion of giants before the flood. And in that sort of tradition, they escaped out of Tartarus into Scythia, and then that is the epicenter for one of those branches, and they would be Scion back into that as well.
Gary, I had a question for you. We've interviewed a lot of people on our show, and Tim Alberino, we did a couple episodes with him, and he was saying that the dragon, the top of the list is the dragon and his princes. And when I think about that, I was like, he's basically, we've been hearing that this is like a kingdom, just like it's a rival of two kingdoms. And so, do you feel like all these empires are being promised? If you follow through with the orders, and maybe they have a prince over them, but they're all loyal to Satan, these guys are promised something.
There's a hierarchy. There's a hierarchy of the rebellious, and then there's a hierarchy on earth as well. And that's why the bloodlines are so important in terms of not only who they come from, but who they've ennobled themselves with drafting, and I call it scioning, into their bloodlines. And so you'll see these coats of arms, right? And that is taciturn imagery of their genealogies and history. And down through the generations, you'll see some additions and maybe even some deletions of some of those coats of arms with different branches. That's because there's different bloodlines coming into play as the generations sort of unfold. So if we look at then the sort of the hierarchy that's in play, it starts with, as you said, the dragon, who is one of the imageries for Satan. He's also, and that comes from Revelation 12. He's a serpent and the dragon. But he's also called a cherubim in Ezekiel 28. So he has different characteristics and different titles to him, but he's unique amongst the other dragons. And the other dragons are seraphim angels, right? So, but he's at the top. So he would oversee.
But he has his entourage too. Like
he does.
He has all of his generals and his lieutenants and everyone's sort of, it's like a big army.
It is. It's called the host of heaven. And there's a loyal host of heaven, and the host of heaven is the army of the angels, which indicates rank. And you would have a rebellious one as well, because they counterfeit everything. So just as Lucifer wanted to have, or Satan wanted to have his throne in heaven and to be like God, that's what he's established as well in his rebellious hierarchical organization. And that would include, he has a throne room. And so he has watchers like the Ophanium and the Seraphim and his own set of archangels. He would counterfeit everything. Now, if you look at that, he would have chief lieutenants, just as you get 7 main angels in most of the pantheons, at least in the offspring gods. And you get more like 10 or 12 in the parent gods. And so if you look at the parent gods as being before the flood, and even though the offspring gods would have been created before the flood or part of the angelic realm, they would have moved up to take over from the angels who procreated the giants before the flood and did horrible things to humankind, they went to the abyss. So they would, through the rank, as any army, you would have a replacement. That's like the Baalim. That's the gods like Zeus in the Greek Olympian gods, or Osiris in the Egyptian pantheon, or Enlil and Enki in the Sumerian pantheon. They're all offspring of the original parent gods who are said to have died because they overthrew them. Well, immortal beings don't die. They went to the abyss. And so in the second incursion, then you would have probably had these same Baalim going to the abyss for the same types of crimes, and then other people would have risen up. And we have 70 nations that are talked about in Deuteronomy 32. I won't go into all of the detail, but 70 nations before the flood, 70 nations after the flood. And they are ruled over by a high level type of angel. So now if you move over to Psalm 82, you have the Council of the Gods. And the Council of the Gods is this hierarching chamber of gods that rule over the 70 nations. And each of those 70 nations that are ruled by a god would have their own throne room. And then as those nations expand, you would have further extensions all the way down. And within the ranks of the angels, you've got, like, obviously Satan being the leader, and he's at the top because he's like God. Then you have below that seraphim angels, which are the dragon-looking ones. Seraphim are fiery, serpent-faced angels, angelic dragons. You also have many other ones that are also listed mostly in the New Testament, whether or not it's the powers or that's the mighties. And you know, when it's talking in Matthew 24 about the powers in heaven that are shaken, powers is a specific rank of angel. That's the exousia of heaven. And there would be those same ones in the angelic realm. And then that hierarchy has a reproduction on earth. So you have the same type of hierarchy with throne rooms, and you know, where the seraphim are the priest class and the governing class in heaven, and responsible for governance of the earth as the orders come out from the throne of God. You have the bishops, and then you have, you know, rooks and knights, and then the pawns would be the angels. And so the knights would be in the heaven. They probably are the Ophanim, which are part of the watchers, because you know, Ophanim means wheel or chariot, and that's the angels that look similar to the cherubim, but there's a slightly different face, and they're amongst the wheels in Ezekiel 1 and Ezekiel 10. Part of the group that Enoch places around the throne, and that's what moves the throne of God in the vision that Ezekiel has. And you also have the seraphim who look after the priest level. And then you have, you know, the mighty ones, which are the mighties, they're like the rooks. And then the angels would be the foot soldiers. So if you can imagine that would be transplanted on rule in the earth within the dynasties who are operating as, with the divine right rule, as the representatives of these gods. And they set up a similar sort of class. And so you kind of imagine a chessboard of good versus evil, the duality sort of nature there. And you've got the king and the queen, which are, you know, ruling. And in the god class, that's the goddess and the god, because it was always both. And then you have the priests of their religion, and then they have, you know, later on in life, you have the knights, but there were the charioteers before that. And then the rooks are these big, mighty towers and fortresses that they would use in their military base. And then the foot soldiers out front are the pawns, and those are the humans that they send out in front of the noble class to do most of the fighting. So yes, there's a definite hierarchy there.
We need a chart. We need a poster.
Gary, one of the things you said I think is fascinating, I just kind of put together too, is that just the fascination or the obsession with the bloodlines, right, and genealogy on the side of the beast kingdoms and the occult, right? It really is the antithesis of what we see in the Bible, right? The bloodlines in the Bible, you know, when it comes to Jesus, is to trace him back to David, and then back to, you know, to Adam and this pure bloodline. And you see the antithesis of that, just like you do with the Antichrist, and just like you do with the, you know, with the beast kingdoms, or the kingdom of the beast. You see the antithesis of these royal bloodlines, as you might call them, tracing their roots back and keeping that bloodline. It's just fascinating to me because it's a DNA war. And I know you talk about this in the Gen 6 conspiracy and all that, but it still
It really
comes
is.
down to the DNA, right? That's what's important at the end.
Yeah, the DNA and the genes, and although they track the bloodlines, it's the genes that produce the bloodline, right? So they call
Right.
that the gene of Isis as an allegory, and of course Isis is a post-Diluvian mother goddess, wife of Osiris. So if you go back to
Right,
the
she
queen
raises Osiris, right? Like that's
yeah,
part of the
yeah.
mythology there, and yeah.
Gary, do you think Satan has a throne room somewhere on Earth, and things are coming and going from his headquarters, or so to speak?
Oh, I would think so. It may not be necessarily in this dimension, but he would have a representation down here as well. So I kind of look towards Mount Hermon as being, where the Baalim were from. And Mount Hermon is sort of renowned as one of the most important mountains in the world. And what's interesting is that Mount Hermon is also called Mount Sion in the Bible, not Sion as in Jerusalem, but this is a little bit different spelling, and it's only called that once in Deuteronomy 4:48. And it's a different meaning lofty. And Mount Hermon is thought to be where the ruling council of gods occupies. And it's also interesting that you have in Mount Hermon, you have the largest manned UN station on Mount Hermon as a ruse to stop, the Syrians and the Israelites from fighting. But I believe it's my speculation that there's way more going on there than that. So, yeah, I would look for Mount Hermon to become more important as we get closer to the end times. To the end times. And, you look at, the word Armageddon, where that last great battle is fought. And everybody, looks at that as Mount Megiddo. Har, A-R, means hill or mountain. And then they look at the Greek spelling, and it's very close to Megiddo, but there's no mountain on Mount Megiddo there is no mountain there. There's a city, but there's no mountain. And when you go back to Isaiah 14:12, there's a word there that is used where Satan is going to raise his throne to be like God and rule over his congregation. If you look at that word congregation, it's a different word than congregation or assembly that's used in the council of gods. But he's going to counterfeit it. And that's why you have two different words, one in Psalms, which is the council of the gods, and then when Satan is trying to create a congregation that is like God. So he's going to have that assembly, just as God will have that established on earth in Mount Zion in Jerusalem in his city. He's going to have it on his Mount Sion with an S as opposed to a Z, which just comes through the French transliterations into English. And it has a spelling, if you consider there's two different G's in the Greek language. This is a different one than that is in the one that is in Revelation 16 with the War of Armageddon. And that's because it's not Megiddo. This is the one that is used in the congregation. And I think that's where that war is going to be fought. At the most important polytheist site where the assembly of the gods, was after the flood, before the flood, and still is.
Gary, this is Nate. This is crazy. I googled this while Gary was talking here. The top of Mount Hermon is the location of the globe's highest permanently manned United Nations position, an altitude of 2,814 meters. So the UN has a permanent base on Mount Hermon.
Luke, I was looking at that on Google Maps a couple days ago.
That's wild.
I was just perusing around Mount Hermon on Google Maps just to see if I could see anything, and there was a big like facility there. I was looking at. I was like, what is that?
Gary, we're like, we're talking in what's going on now, and you actually said something interesting about Satan's throne room possibly existing in another dimension. And I know one of the things that you've talked about at length, and we haven't really covered on the show, which I think kind of fits into that space and where we're at right now in this discussion, is CERN. And there's a lot of people that talk about CERN, and really what they're trying to do is open up portals and dimensions as opposed to, colliding particles. And I know that you talked probably ad nauseum about this subject, but it's something we've really covered on this show, and we'd love to chat a little bit about your thoughts on CERN and what's really going on there, and what the agenda may be with that whole project.
Yeah, so let me do a little preamble that leads in from Mount Hermon into that. So,
all right,
Yeah.
Mount Hermon is the location of the Pan Temple, and it's right beside the Rock of the Gods and the cave to Hades.
Yeah, the gates of hell, right? As I say in the New Testament.
The gates of hell, yes, where the abyss would be located. And this indicates, it's probably not in the earth. It's probably in the earth, but in another dimension where the underworld is. And there are portals. And if you go to the foot of Mount Hermon, which is the Golan Heights, you have the place of Gilgal Raphaim, the Wheel of the Giants, Wheel of the Ghosts, and several different names that sort of go with it. But it's the place where the people of Ugarit were worshiping, and that's where the Raphaim were heavily centralized in the nation of Ugarit, in the city of Ugarit. And there are hundreds and hundreds of dolmens there. And if people aren't familiar with what a dolmen is, Google it, Dolmen. It's like a mini Stonehenge thing. And they're known around the world as fairy dolmens or fairy portals, because dolmen means a portal. And so when we're talking about different dimensions, when you go through a portal, you're going into a different dimension. And that the Raphaim were thought to be able to go back and forth between, or at least their spirits were. And certainly the angels did. So when you get into the Ugaritic text, you're talking about them going back and forth between the underworld and the physical world, and even up to the heavens. So keep that in mind. So when we talk about CERN, it's not located at Mount Hermon. It's located at another, very important occultic site there. And a lot of people think that the abyss is located below there. But, when you get into all the different legends about where the abyss is, or an entrance, it all sort of goes into the central place. So you've got these sort of highways of portals all over the world that lead to essentially what all cultures talk about, that's in this underworld. So let's not get too caught up as to whether the abyss is under where CERN is located or it's in Mount Hermon, because there's many, many roads there. But what's interesting about CERN is that it has technology that is being used there that is rather unique. So you have quantum computing, and that's being married with AI. And they're also looking for certain particles that I'll come back to in a minute. But keep your mind on quantum computing and AI. Quantum computing is designed to go into multiple dimensions or multiple universes. And quantum computing is kind of limited. It has sort of like firing a bullet at a time, and it just can't cover enough territory in what they're looking for. So you need AI to be able to merge with that, so they can look in multiple universes all over the place all the time for whatever that they're looking for. And the thought is, what they're looking for in terms of what they're trying to find from a place is they'd like to get into the abyss and let out all of the fallen angels that were put in there for the crimes they created against humanity, both before and after the flood. And the worst of the Nephilim and the Raphaim are in cells there as well that they're trying to bring out, because they're trying to bring on the end time. And this is where their knowledge came from. So the 7 sciences that the science is working on is trying to bring back the people who delivered the ancient knowledge that we're just catching up to now. And they want to bring those angels back. They want to have it like Atlantis, where we're intermingling with those angels as they did in the Golden Age. And so that's the one aspect that they're trying to do. Now, if we look at kind of an analogy out of history, or at least biblical history, and or out of Sumerian history with Enmerkar, which seems to be the same individual as Nimrod, 3rd generation after the flood, they both build Babel Tower. And what's interesting about Babel Tower and Babel City that Nimrod has built, he gets his knowledge from Hermes, who finds this antediluvian knowledge and the ancient religion, and reinstates that at Babel. And we get an indication of that knowledge because they're able to build this city somehow, because the knowledge comes out of nowhere, and anything that they're going to do going forward, nothing is going to be prevented from them doing. So they've received this information, this kind of the hints that the Bible provides us. And if you look at what Babel means in Hebrew, it means confusion of languages. Like, okay, well, that happens in the biblical text, but it doesn't really tell you anymore. It also happens in the Sumerian one. There's this scattering of peoples with different languages. But Nimrod stays in Mesopotamia, in Sumer, which is Shinar transliterated. And the Akkadians come out of Nimrod as part of the peoples that are part of the buildup into the Assyrian Empire and the Beast Empires. And we talked a little bit about that earlier on in the show. And their definition for Babel isn't confusion of languages. Theirs is a traditional EL or AL, as it would be in Mesopotamia, which is a god or an angel, and Bab as being a gateway. So right after the flood, you have Nimrod trying to build this tower, and in Akkadian, it means a gateway of the gods, or, you know, a wormhole or a portal. And he's reintroduced this religion and technology of the antediluvian world and has started the same type of rebellion. And one presumes he's trying to free these individuals out of the abyss that's in another dimension. Now, the other thing that they seem to be looking for with this technology is what they call the God particle. And there's 2 different variations of it. I'm going to focus on the one that's important.
Higgs boson, right?
Yes. And that's a little bit...
They're called the Higgs boson.
But it's a little bit different than that. That's the sort of the superficial thing. But the real God particle is the Atma particle. And that's ATHMA, and another version has an N on it. So Atma or Atman, you may see it said or pronounced that. And this is a particle that's invisible, that merges with particles at, the subatomic level, and contains all the knowledge. And when it merges with those particles, that's invisible. It's invisible with the measurable particle. Then through quantum entanglement, it sends that knowledge everywhere all at once. So they're trying to tap into that because they want to be able to supply godhood as part of the promise for this new age. And in godhood, in the religions of knowledge, the polytheist religions, unlimited knowledge of a god is a prerequisite, as is immortality. So they're going to have to offer both with the mark of the beast. So it appears they're looking for both that knowledge particle, and they're also trying to free their godfathers, if I can put it that way, as in the celestial mafia, who produced the original Nephilim, and to bring about their rendezvous with destiny, which is the end time, at a time that's before the preordained time. But of course, they won't be successful.
And that's what I was going to kind of ask you, is that, do you think that all the world leaders are very aware of this? Like, they're not... Because, the general population doesn't know anything about anything we've talked about. I mean, some people have a little bit of idea here and there, but what's going on right now in our world, it very feels orchestrated. And are our world leaders involved on like a massive scale and help ushering this in? And do they think they're going to win? I mean, how do you get this many people on board with these plans if they don't think they're going to win?
That's just it. They do think they're going to win. So they're being told by the people, the adept levels, the people that are, way above 3rd degree or 33rd degree. They are, the purebloods who are initiated from childhood They are talking with celestial masters. They're talking with demons. They're talking with aliens. They're talking with the Great White Brotherhood. There's so many different names for these spiritual beings that they're talking to and who are helping them to get things up to speed so that they can bring on this end time battle for humankind or their offspring to have a realm that's outside of God, that the fallen angels can rule as they did in days of old and away from God. And so when you look at that aspect, they're being lied to that God is nothing more than another angel. So if you go into Gnosticism, you have Sophia, who creates these 7 archangels, and Satan is included in it as one of those angels, and so is the God of the Bible that they would call El Baoth or Damarish, and that he was the one that went rogue. So he's no more powerful than these other angels. And that's the dualism that they teach. It's the good force against the evil force, right? It's the yin and the yang, and there is this perpetual battle that's going on. So they're telling their followers that they can win, or at least win a realm away from God. The angels know they can't win, but they're lying to their followers because they're trying to destroy humankind.
And Gary, this seems to be like, this is always the deception or the lie, right? I mean, this is the same story the Babylonians were telling the Enuma Elish, which is that the serpent god, he's the creator god. And it's the antithesis of the kingdom, right? It's that the serpent sits at the top of the hierarchy, not the God of Israel, not Yahweh, not the God of the universe. It's quite the opposite, and it's still the same deception being propagated today. Correct? I mean, that's what I'm hearing. Is that you can look back into the very origins of Babylon, and out of the fresh off the ark, and a couple generations later, they're talking about how it was a serpent that created everything, and the serpent created life, and then you have like you say, the dualism. It's the mystery religions. It's the the divine female and the mother goddess that we see in
the cosmic
Masonic traditions.
The cosmic egg of the dragons, the dragon creator gods in China, the feathered serpents in Central and South America. It's always the serpent god that is, and that is, again, I think that's the imagery of the seraphim angels, and in particular with Satan as being the head dragon, the head seraphim.
Gary, here's a question for you. What role do you think human beings play in this? If this is a war and it's 2 kingdoms, what role do we have? You know what I mean?
Well, this whole war is being fought around humans. Humans are the sort of the key. So humans are created after the fall of, or after the rebellion of the fallen angels, and after Satan falls from heaven. And humans are created to be raised above these fallen angels and equal, to be like angels. And we're going to actually judge these angels in the future time for the crimes against humanity that they have done throughout our existence. And so they don't want to have that happen. They don't want to have humans succeed to be raised up above these fallen angels, because that will have demonstrated that their rebellion is wrong. And for the whole angelic being, angels were created immortal with free choice to follow God or not, and at least a third of them have rebelled. And they had intimate knowledge of God, so they know how powerful it is. So they know they can't win, but they're looking to say, we want to live on our own, which they're never going to get. But humans were created, the Adamites were created without this intimate knowledge of God, and not mortal. And we have to choose on faith. And so our faith will carry us through to be raised up like gods. Now, what the fallen angels did not anticipate is the resurrection. They thought that they could lead humans astray and into oblivion, and they almost did with the first revenges before the flood. And the flood, almost wiped out everybody, but God saved 8, according to the biblical record on that. And so they're trying to destroy humankind again in the end time, not because they know they haven't lost, because they know they've lost by this point. I'll touch on that in a second, but they want to destroy as many as they can because they know their fate is sealed. Their fate was sealed when Jesus rose from the grave on the third day. But before he rose in 1 Peter, he went down and talked to these rebellious, imprisoned spirits and said, your rebellion and your fate is sealed. I'm going to rise, and through my resurrection, humankind will be raised up to be like angels. And they will have a role that may be higher than regular angels, because angels will be serving us in the future time. So as the Bible tells us. And so we know that they didn't know about the resurrection and didn't anticipate it, because as Corinthians talks about it, First Corinthians talks about, is that if they had known about the resurrection, they would have ensured Jesus was not crucified, as opposed to ensuring that he would be crucified. And we know they wanted him crucified because Satan actually entered into Judas to make sure, in an avatar relationship, that he had enough courage to go through with betraying the Messiah. So they didn't know about it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done it, because it was the checkmate move, right? And from that point on, they can only cause harm.
And Nate, that's interesting, because Gary, we talked a little bit about that with Dr. Michael Heiser on the show, about how the temptation of Christ is a bit about Satan seeing if Jesus can die, right? Like he's saying, why don't you just throw yourself off of here? Because doesn't the Bible say, or the Scriptures say that the host of angels are at your command and they'll catch you? He's basically trying to feel him out to see if Jesus can actually be killed or not. And had they known that he, that, and then that part's amazing. It's amazing to kind of look at Scripture with this perspective, and then be like, man, they didn't know.
Yeah, and
they chose wrong, of course.
Yeah, they did, and of course, Jesus was a bit of a mystery to them. They know about humans, and they know about angels, and they know about the Word of God and stuff like that. But Jesus shows up in the world in a different way than how they created offspring in the physical world, right, through sexual relationship. In this scenario, you have the Holy Spirit that is working with its own powers with Mary to create the oiketerion, the body and the soul that's going to house the Word of God. So you're going to have a body that's going to become Jesus with a soul and a body, and then the Spirit's going to be coming from the Word of God, who becomes flesh. And they understand that, but they didn't understand, okay, what is Jesus able to do and not able to do on the earth, right? And what's he really here to do? And what they want to do is corrupt him, because anything that's in the physical earth is subject to the corruption of the physical world, which I think is how fallen angels became corrupted. And they need a oiketerion to interact physically in the world. So to create offspring humans, they needed a body. So they needed to create their own body and their own soul for their spirit to enter in, so that they could have DNA to create the offspring. And oiketerion is the word that comes out of Jude 1:6, saying where they left their habitation. And it's also from the house of heaven in 2 Corinthians 5. It's only used twice in the New Testament. And that means a dwelling place for the spirit, because they're spirit beings. They left their dwelling place in heaven to interact in the physical world and became corrupted, and also created offspring. So Jesus wasn't created through an offspring process as Nephilim. He was created as a vessel that has a human soul and body, but has the spirit of the Word of God. And that was something that is totally unique. And they were probably trying to figure out, how do we deal with Jesus? Because they knew there was going to be a Messiah, but they didn't know what the Messiah was going to be like or how he was going to come about.
It's interesting, Gary. It's almost like sending a secret agent into a country, you know what I mean? And they have to be very careful about what they say, right? Because the governments are listening. And in this case, Satan's listening, right? But meanwhile, he's trying to save the population at the same time. There's multiple layers going on here. Jesus is doing more spiritual warfare than most of us Christians have been raised to understand. We have no idea what else he's doing, what else is going on. There are multiple layers there, right?
Well, just think of what he did when he decided that Peter would be the rock that he would build the church on earth on, and changes Peter's name at that point in time. He went to Caesarea Philippi, and that is located at the foot of Mount Hermon, where the rock of the gods are, where the Pan Temple is, where the cave to the underworld is. And he said, I'm going to build a church through Peter that will not be overcome. He was sending the message and laying down the gauntlet to the assembly that we talked about earlier, to the congregation of the gods at Mount Hermon.
Right. It's strategic. Everything he did was strategic. And I think it's also the brilliance, of an omniscient God, because even the Jews at the time weren't looking for the Messiah to come as Jesus came, right? I mean, it was this whole, it's brilliant. I don't know how to say it except for like that even the Jews, even to today, that many don't see that Jesus came and fulfilled the entirety of prophecy in Scripture, and they were still looking for a king that would rule with an iron fist, liberate Israel, and he did. He just didn't do it the way that they had supposed he would. In the same way, the enemy wasn't ready either. I mean, they tried to use Herod to wipe out all the infants, right? And it just maybe we can kill it. Maybe we can kill him. It was just a series of folly, which is just fascinating. I love looking at the Scripture in that light. It's amazing, especially when you look at the bloodlines. We talked about bloodlines earlier, and you look at the bloodlines and why it's important and why the DNA is important for the Messiah, and then you see the flip side of that, and you go, "This is why the DNA is important for the beast and the beast kingdom," as they draw their bloodlines back to the ultimate corruption of flesh, right? The full corruption of flesh in the Rephaim, in the second coming of the Nephilim.
Yeah, the divine offspring with the divine right to rule over humans, given by the fallen angels. Yeah.
So flash forward to right now. We have UFO disclosure going on at a massive level. They're preparing us for something. And we have floods all over the world. We've got pandemics, quote unquote pandemics. We've got a lot of the world seems like it's on the, it's beginning to get crazier and crazier. And Tim said on one of our episodes that these UFOs are being piloted by angels. And it's something I never considered. What do you think, Gary? What do you think about the UFO phenomenon and just the signs of the end times itself?
Well, it's going to be part of it. And this is preparation. And right now they're giving us a lot of propaganda with the information that they're providing that, it could be Russia, it could be China, except that, the time of Roswell, when the sort of the UFO age emerges, China and Russia didn't have that technology, and these things have been around ever since then. So, I mean, they're not even being anywhere near being truthful, but it is a preparation for the manipulated knowledge that they're going to be handing to us and accounting for where these beings are and who they are. Where do they come from and who are they, right? So I think to answer your question, I think there is likely some of the fallen angels who are flying very, very advanced, and the most advanced of these types of spaceships, or whatever we want to call them. And we get that out of the Indian epics, out of the Vedas, where you have these flying, powerful, weaponized spaceships of war that was used in the war with the gods back then. And I think that's, what we're going to see again with the fallen angels. But again, there's this hierarchy. So, when you have the elementals that, the gnomes are part of the 4 groups of elementals, part of the ugly ones, but it's the gnomes that are the ones that are described almost identical to the grays. In fairy lore, they come through portals and they're flying machines and they kidnap people, and they're the ones in charge of the technology, the knowledge, and the genealogies. And they're identical to the descriptions of gray aliens, including the kidnapping and everything that they do. And when you understand elementals in the occult world at the bottom of the hierarchy, and you're going to have a whole series of levels of different types of beings that are going to look like they're from all over the universe at just different levels of technology, all united to fight against the evil god of the Bible. And so I think that's what they're preparing us for, and they're starting to come forward in a little bit more forthright manner, but still mixing it with propaganda so that they can say these are advanced beings who are enemies of your enemy, and that if you want to have a seat at the galactic table, you're going to have to fight for your freedom. So just as in Star Wars, right? It's going to be a very, very sort of similar kind of scenario to that. But yeah, I would think that there are certainly fallen angels that are flying some of these, but also some of their, and I guess I didn't do a good job of explaining that as I think about it, is the sort of the greater sort of Nephilim creation concept, which included all sorts of things like the little people, like the salamanders, which are more of a reptilian type of people that are higher than the elementals, even though they're considered part of the elementals. So they have a bunch of beings like the Bigfoot that they were likely protected through portals off the earth somehow. They either survived the flood, recreated them after the flood, and then protected them again after that have survived ever since, that are going to be part of this whole host of beings, including the fallen angels. And then they're going to have to add in the last piece. They have these bodiless spirits of the Rephaim and the Nephilim that are going to require bodies. So they're going to have some sort of clone body or transhumanism type of body that they can have these spirits go into, that has a body and a soul, or a counterfeit body and a soul that can hold that bodiless spirit. They need that oikotarian to dwell and physically interact in the world in the end time. And I think that's part of what they're going to be creating through science.
And we're full circle here, Nate, because again, back to Bigfoot. And Gary mentioned the little people, which really grinds your gears, gets you going. Nate loves when the little people come up. I don't know what it is. He has some sort of affinity for the little people. So you just made his day.
Yeah, terrific.
Terrific. I'm just gonna own it this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's Bigfoot. We are. I can't even speak. We are full circle. So we
sure.
Well, this helps explain why the stories of Bigfoot going in and out of sight, arriving and leaving on UFOs. And something I wanted to talk about with you, Gary, is that a lot of these UFOs are seen flying right on top of mountains or inside mountains, just going right in them somehow. So it seems like these creatures are using these things to move about. But the thing that was interesting to me, Gary, was that Tim kind of described that all these entities are flying around. That's how they travel. It's like a Ford truck for angels and fallen angels. Everyone's using them, and I never really considered that. Like it's sort of the tanks on both sides. They need vehicles
in the physical world. Yeah, if they want to interact in the physical world, they need physical vehicles for their physical bodies, right?
So weird that they can kind of go between the two heavens.
Yeah. Let's get physical. Yeah.
Let's get physical. Well, so how do we let's end this episode maybe with some hope, Gary. Like, what do you How do you maintain a sense of hope with all this information, and what do you think that human beings are, as this beast empire keeps creeping towards the mainstream every day? What are some things we can do besides our typical, praying and seeking truth? Is there hope? You think we're rescued? Do you think we're provided some sort of refuge, some sort of shelter to weather the storm?
It would be good. I know a lot of people believe in a pre-trib rapture, which is the last 7 years. I'm not convinced that that's the case, and I would say it's into just after the midpoint of the last 7 years. What we're told as Christians is that we are going to go through tribulation, and that Revelation 2:8 says there's going to be 10 years of tribulation. So there may be this tribulation that's even before the last 7 years with the rise of Babylon. So we know how the story ends, but we're coached in the book of Revelation that we have to have patience and we have to have faith, because what must take place is going to take place. This has to come to an end, and it's going to at the ordained time. And these are the events that you're going to go through, and many are going to be killed and many are going to be persecuted. And we know many are going to be killed. We have those that show up in Revelation 7, which are the ones that come after the first fruits that are raised in Revelation 6. And then there's the mark of the beast, where the people who are still here and they're not going to worship Antichrist or Satan and not take the mark are going to be killed, and they're going to be resurrected in the millennium. But we know how it ends. And this has to be how it ends, so that the adversarial forces and the people who follow them fully convict themselves, and there's an opportunity for all the names that were written in the book of life before creation are fulfilled. And so we know how it comes out into the millennium, and we know there's still more names to be fulfilled throughout the millennium to fulfill the names that were written in the book. So my advice for people is that do not wish for the end time. It is going to be horrible. But if it is coming, and I think that it is, then we need to prepare for it. And we need to put on our armor, and we need to communicate as best we can to people what is going on, and in a way that isn't going to discredit us and isn't going to have people turn away from Christianity. And I do think Christians are going to be enemies of the state, and we're also going to be some of our own worst enemies as we do this, and we're going to cause some of the difficulty to get the message through to people who desperately need it, because we're going to get it wrong, and we're going to be doing the wrong kinds of predictions, and we're going to lose our credibility. And I think one of those things is going to be the timing of the rapture, and I think another one is going to be pointing to the wrong Antichrist, just as people basically point to almost every president that comes along as he's the Antichrist. That's the tip of the iceberg. So what's coming at us is some things that we cannot imagine. So the good news is we know how it ends. The bad news is we need to prepare for it. And we need to be ready, because we can't imagine what's coming. It's that bad.
There's your hope. There's your hope, Nate.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, the hope is in Jesus. I think Gary makes a great point, though. We know how it's ended. Ending has been written, and we can find, we can rest our laurels on that the God of the Bible and the God we serve wins. I don't know that doesn't mean everything's going to be. I think the misconstruing of all that, especially in the American church, is that everything's going to be fantastic and great, and we're all going to have all the things we want. And I don't think the Bible says any of that stuff.
Well, I mean, as Egypt suffered the plagues of Egypt, right? They went through a few of them, but it seems like God provided a way out. They didn't endure all of them.
Right.
It would make sense, right, Gary, that maybe we would endure some of this, or do you think we'll go through all of it?
But we will not endure the wrath, but we will endure tribulation. So the wrath bowls we're going to be saved from. We're going to be saved from the year of the Lord's wrath and the day of the Lord. But those who have not yet prepared themselves properly and are still alive, they're going to be left. And their choice is to take the mark or not. And those who refuse, and there will be many, I think, who will recognize, whoops, what just happened, so to speak. And they're going to be a whole new level of persecution. So you're going to have persecution by the mark of the beast system and Antichrist and the dragon, as Revelation 12 talks about. And you're going to have, before that, Babylon with its persecution and genocide against the saints that are shown in Revelation 7 and talked about in Matthew 24.
Man, it's heavy. And what's the timeline, Gary? Like, you think,
Well,
what do you think? You think,
again, without getting, I won't get too specific, but what we're told in Matthew 24 is that there's a generation, there's the fig tree generation. In Judah, the southern kingdom, the visible Jewish people of today have to be back in Israel, and also one presumes Jerusalem, because Jerusalem is basically involved in almost all the end time prophecies. And so they gained control of Jerusalem in 1967. So we're told in the Psalms that a generation is 70 years, and in Genesis 6:3, it's 120 years. So it could be soon, or it could be a little bit longer away. And there are still a lot of pieces to be put together, but it's marching towards that. And it doesn't have to go to the end of those year periods, and catastrophes can bring things along. So I think we're in the fig tree generation. I think we're in the birth pangs of that last generation. And the birth pangs are wars and rumors of war. We're going to see more of that. We haven't seen much yet. We're going to see more rising earthquakes, and I think we're going to see more contrived earthquakes. We're going to see famine and pandemics. And COVID, I think, is the first sort of contrived pandemic that we've seen. And we're going to see more of it, just as China is on record with the people overseeing the military lab in Wuhan, which is working in conjunction with the other Wuhan lab, that the next war will be fought with biological weapons. And that's what they're trying to develop. So we're going to see more contrived things. And I think all of the birth pangs are basically contrived, and they get worse as we go up to, as we close in towards the start of the last 7 years, you get the seals that are 25% destruction of everything, including people. And so they get those birth pangs are getting stronger, and all the birth pangs are included in the catastrophes of the seals. And they're so horrible that people at that time think this is the day of the Lord, but it's not yet, because the trumpets are 33% destruction. And then the wrath bowls would be 100%, but Jesus steps in to prevent that at the end.
wow. And my last question for you, Gary, is that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but a few people on our show have suggested the mark of the beast is the genetic mark of the beast. Like, it's something that you do physically that changes you, versus what I was told growing up that's kind of more
a microchip in your forehead or your hand,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
Like, maybe that was something that got us off trail, because what we see is the defilement of the human genome over and over again throughout history. And it would make sense that that's what they were trying to do in the beginning, and maybe that's what they're going to try to do in the end. Is that kind of what how you see it? It's a genetic thing, or is it a physical thing, like a microchip or something?
It's that and more. It's all of that. This is going to be ultimately plugged into the beast system. It's going to be able to deliver the vaccines, the sorceries, the pharmakeia, as you take that back to Greek, just as Babylon, when it rises to power, deceives the world through its sorceries, pharmakeia. You're going to have the ability to access through this combined system of AI, quantum computing, and medical technologies and implants. It all comes together in that, and it has the ability to work at the subatomic level, which we're seeing, I think, the baseline of the mRNA sending messages at that level. They're going to build on that technology, and they're going to change your DNA. And if we look at those who are going to burn in the lake of fire forever, it's people who, it's fallen angels who did the crimes against humanity and created violations against the laws of creation. And this is going to be changing the genes or the DNA, or putting the gene of Isis into people. They're going to manufacture Nephilim, perhaps. But it's going to be enough that people who take that mark, or who worship Antichrist, or who worship Satan in the last 3.5 years, they will burn forever in the lake of fire, as opposed to other people judged at the resurrection of the dead, who are sentenced to the lake of fire. They suffer the second death. That's not for the people who take the mark of the beast. Something changes. And the only sin that is not forgiven by Christ's sacrifice are blasphemies against the Holy Spirit, which is the provider of life. So a corruption against the giver of life from the Spirit of God.
So don't do that, right? Stay away from that. It's not lake of fire. Is
don't do that.
Not where you want to end up. Yeah.
Well, you think it's going to be an obvious thing, because a lot of our members have been discussing in the back end, through some of our members chats, that are people going to know they're doing it? Are they going to be aware of it? I mean,
like you can say they're going to be tricked into it. Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
I think they're going to demand it.
That's
just like people are demanding vaccines, right? And vaccine delivery will come through those implants as well, and anything else your body needs.
That makes sense. I mean, like the whole Bible talks about it being you can't buy, sell, and trade. I mean, it's going to be demanded. Otherwise, you can't do those basic things that you require to live, right?
And everything will be connected. So everything is interconnected. So you can't buy or sell, period, right? It all comes through this implant that's going to be connected to this huge AI system. And
sounds like a hive. It sounds like a hive mind, almost like in Star Trek, where they're all connected to the hive, right? And they have this whole.
It's a good analogy.
Collective brain, yeah. Well, Gary, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for your time here and for jumping in with Nate and I and all these crazy topics. Really looking forward to the new book coming out. I know people that have heard you on the show here before, and you actually do a lot of interviews in places. But can you tell our listeners where they can find your book, maybe about when your new book's coming out, or where they can interact with some of the things you're doing in these spaces?
Yeah, so if people are wanting to get a hold of me, best place to get a hold of me is through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's the Genesis 6conspiracy.com. And seemingly only Google is working for people trying to get a hold of me through that website, although sometimes people get through on other sites, so I don't know what's going on there. But that's how you can get a hold of me. And I've got a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on the website. I've got an icon you can click on to get a hold of me, to ask me a question or ask for additional information on things. And I have a lot of documents I supply at no charge to people on topics that we're talking about. A lot of what we're talking about today I have on documents. And if you want to buy the book, you can buy it online and get a signed copy there, or you click over to Kindle and get a digital copy, or over to Amazon and to barnesandnoble.com to buy it there. So lots of ways to get a hold of the book. And I am also on Facebook under Gary Wayne, so you can message me there. But the best way is I think through the website with an email. Now the new book is, I am working on it feverishly. I would like to have it in the hands of the publisher by the end of the year. So hopefully early to spring next year it would be out. And so it's really coming together well. So I can't believe how fast. And I always said it probably wouldn't be a book as big as the last one. I'm trying to make sure that it's not going to be that large, but the more I go, it's like, I got to put that in and I got to put that in. So it's hard to keep it small on such a big topic.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's funny because I know. Yeah, follow Gary on Facebook. Get involved. We put you in a couple of memes, Gary. A couple of our memes we put out there on our Blurry Creatures Facebook page. I think you liked a few of them, so it always makes us laugh when our guests get involved with the. We produce a lot of. We try to keep it a little lighthearted. It's serious content, but
we try to work the 80s in there and make people laugh a little bit as well.
So whenever we make it, we're like, I wonder what our guests think about us. So they think we're nuts over here on Blurry Creatures. But we're having fun. So. Well, thanks, Gary.
Thank
for
you.
Back
thanks
on,
so much,
and,
Gary.
Let us know when the book comes out.
I will. Thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Gary reminds me of Derek Gilbert in the sense that you can just start rattling off like crazy historical tribes, locations, names, and it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's a full shotgun blast of information.
It's hard for me because I'm thinking like big pictures and big ideas. So I get lost in my mind trying to keep track of where we are. Where are we at in geography right now? I don't know.
You need a map. You need an atlas.
You and I, we need to hire Gary, Luke, to create a Blurry Creatures poster of all the creatures and a description and a history. And people,
Or why don't we get trading cards? We can get trading cards like the garbage pail kids, and we can just have all of the creatures.
That would be a great idea. We put together like a pack with a little bit of bubble gum in it, and you crack that thing open, and you just learn about your creatures.
Yeah, all the chimerical creatures, all the spiritual entities, all the sentient creatures.
Dude, that's a great idea. Just think about that. You get yourself a Blurry Creatures t-shirt, become a member of the show, and get a pack of sweet cards.
And guess what?
Stickers.
Like the really rare ones will be those tribes that we can't pronounce that don't have any lineage.
Yeah, and they'll have errors on them. I'll be like, oh man, dude, I got the
Anunnaki hologram.
Dude, I got my Beckett out. It's worth $7.
Dude, I used to love Beckett. Don't even get started on that.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's heavy, man. It's the last week. We kind of need a Bigfoot episode or something, man, because it's just been Tim, Rob, Laura, people out there listening. If you're still listening, congratulations. You win a prize.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but you've made it through.
You made it.
It's heavy, man. When I'm editing back, I'm just like, man, what do we,
People want it though.
Signing up for
give
torture.
the people what they want. All right.
Yeah.
They want to drink in the fire hose, and we're happy to oblige.
It kind of reminds me, Luke, of like, when people go see horror movies. I never have been that person. They go pay money and they sit in the theater and they just get terrified, and they like it. But we're not doing that. But the information is just as heavy. It's just as hardcore. It's just as strong. And people come to Blurry Creatures thinking there's a little Bigfoot tail, and it's like, what? Boom! There it is.
You're like, right. Bigfoot didn't even have a tail. I don't know what's going on here.
Man, but he could grow a tail in the end times.
Sure could.
We don't know.
Sure could, Nate.
All kinds of weird stuff's coming. If you want to become a member, blurrycreatures.com/members. Luke, tell them what they win.
Oh, you get all kinds of good stuff. You get exclusive discounts on our fabulous merch. You get episodes early. When we can get them out early, you get them early. We'll have exclusive episodes for members only that drop only behind that paywall for our members. You get interactive, what we call virtual happy hours or Zoom meetings where Nate and I get together, and we've got one coming up August 11th with Dr. Laura Sanger, who was been a guest now 3 times on our show. She's going to come on, and we'll have a panel discussion where you get to interact directly with the guests and with us. And we're not the interesting part, obviously, but Laura is. And things along the line of that. We're going to have some new merch dropping, and we've got an exclusive Facebook page for members only as well, where we keep the discussion going. That's only for members. And really, guys, it's about the cost of a coffee and a half if you go to the drive-thru or go to your local coffee shop. That's about all it costs a month. So cut down on your caffeine intake a little bit if you want, or don't, and support us anyway.
Yeah.
But Nate and I just
up your blurry content.
Yeah, up your blurry content, and then we have some fun discussions on, especially Nate, on the Facebook group that's just for members, and just a way to keep.
You're the elusive character in there. You peek through the trees a little bit, and you keep going.
I'm like the giant from DW's episode that just kind of looks through the trees, and there I am.
You're like, Nate's just
big old head poking through the trees.
Yeah. But that's cool. You keep it mysterious. I keep it emo. It's a good blend.
It's a nice blend. So it's a rare musk.
It's a
Yes.
it's a rare musk. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. You're the head, I'm the heart, and we just keep going.
That's right. Something like that, Nate.
I love it.
Summer
dude.
sends us love, right?
Summer sends us love, baby. Yeah, thanks for tuning in to Blurry Creatures. Head over to blurrycreatures.com/members to be a part of everything Luke just said. And what do you say, Luke?
We roll that time cop.